This week, the United States of America celebrates the anniversary of its independence from British rule. And as is tradition, we here in this country celebrate with barbecue, beer, and bombs. Fireworks, but you get what I'm saying. Also bombs. Professional wrestling is as American as apple pie. The origins of the sport as we know it come from right here in the US of A. Part of what's made wrestling as enduring as it's been is its classic good versus evil storytelling. And in a country that always portrays itself as the good guys, what's more appropriate for business than a good old-fashioned American wrestler? Wrestlers have wrapped themselves up in old glory and have fought for the American way for about a century now. And while I personally find the trope of the American versus the foreign baddie to be a tired one, the reason it's persisted for so long is because, quite frankly, it works. But over the decades, who has done the best job at representing the Stars and Stripes? This week, I'm gonna rank them, my top 8 picks for the greatest American wrestlers of all time. Think of it more like American gimmicks and not so much greatest wrestlers from America, because those are two very different lists. Number 8, The Patriot. Del Wilkes made his first splash on the national scene in the late 80s as the Trooper, the AWA's most heroic traffic cop and/or male stripper. While the promotion was on its last legs, the Trooper's physique and presence helped shoot him to a world title match with Larry Zbyszko fairly quickly, suggesting bigger things could be ahead. By the early 90s, Wilkes found his biggest success as the Patriot, and quite honestly, it's a miracle that no one in the history of wrestling before Wilkes had gone by that name. Wearing a mask that was meant less to conceal his identity and more to embody the spirit of America, the Patriot became the top star of the fledgling Global Wrestling Federation out of Dallas, Texas. After Global folded, the Patriot worked in Japan and in WCW. There he held the tag titles with a young Buff Bagwell on 2 occasions as Stars and Stripes. After no-showing Slamboree 95, the Patriot found more fortune working for All Japan Pro Wrestling. He formed an alliance with the legendary Kenta Kobashi, as well as a future WWE executive and reality TV star in Johnny Ace. By 1997, the World Wrestling Federation had created a heated rivalry between the US and Canada. The Patriot found himself in the right place at the right time to be picked up by the company. It was a fine enough push for Del, but the theorist in me believes that the Patriot might have been a way to cool off Bret Hart heading into his championship match with Shawn Michaels at Survivor Series. Wilkes actually beat Bret in an upset on Raw, which led to a losing effort in a rematch for the world title at the Ground Zero pay-per-view, and later a tag team flag match at Bad Blood. It was a forgettable affair, not just due to the quality of the match itself, but because the show was already covered by a cloud of tragedy in the wake of Brian Pillman's death one day earlier, and beyond that, it's mostly remembered for the debut of Hell in a Cell. He was set to captain Team USA against Team Canada at Survivor Series until he suffered a torn triceps and was pulled off of TV. He retired soon after his WWF release, but sadly became the victim of gimmick infringement in real life at the hands of wrestler Tom Brandi. Wilkes claimed that the former Salvatore Sincere spent years making appearances in the Northeast as the Patriot without his permission or blessing, although Brandi claims that he always did have permission. The conflict never seemed to reach a mutual resolution, though, as Wilkes passed away of a heart attack in 2021 at the age of 59. Number 7. Tony Atlas. I'll be honest, there have been a couple of countdowns over the years that I have foolishly overlooked putting Atlas on, even though he was very qualified to be in them. And since one of his most popular nicknames is Mr. USA, this was the perfect chance to finally give him his due. Tony Atlas, a former bodybuilder and powerlifter, found years of success in professional wrestling. Possessing one of the most chiseled physiques in an era where definition wasn't a priority, his career began in 1974 as he spent years working through the territories before arriving in the Federation in '79. Not only is he one of the few people to ever get a win over Hulk Hogan in the 80s, Mr. USA made history in 1983 alongside Soul Man Rocky Johnson, beating the Wild Samoans to become the first black WWF Tag Team Champions. Atlas would be gone from the Federation 1 year later due to drug use, spent a quick spell in the AWA, then came right back to the WWF, where he spent the next couple years as a serviceable mid-card performer. Unfortunately, his issues with substance abuse continued to derail his momentum as he bopped around from company to company to the point where he spent a year and a half out of the business due to being homeless. The gimmick that he is given credit for saving his life was arguably his most controversial. In the summer of 1990, Atlas was rebranded as African warrior Saba Simba. The story was that Tony was honoring his African heritage, changing his name and being billed from the jungles of Uganda. Sounds all well and good until Roddy Piper just shits all over it from the word go.
That ain't no Saba Simba, that's Tony Atlas with walking around look like some bird's real cold the way he's walking around.
Legally changing his name to Saba Simba.
Well, that's ridiculous.
The character went over like a lead balloon, and what's worse, it felt like it was just a chance for the company to present what was at best a crude stereotype to the masses. And lucky for them, they found a guy who was on hard enough times to take the gig. But honestly, the most offensive thing about it all was that Vince McMahon would describe him on commentary as a youngster. Atlas continued his journeyman ways for the next several years, but would finally earn his induction into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2006. And even after that, he found more success at a managerial role 2 years later, helping lead Mark Henry to the ECW Championship. For all of his career pitfalls, Atlas remains an important part of wrestling history, and his recovery from rock bottom is as close to an American success story as you can get. Number 6. The Undertaker. For somebody with a career as long as Mark Calloway's, having an engineered mid-period wasn't a bad idea. You walk away from what made you popular, what brought you to the dance, so when you ultimately bring it back, the fans are going to be really excited for it. Think of Biker Taker as Kiss without the face paint. The Undertaker was positioned as a red yet cold-blooded American way back in 1993, though the Betsy Ross flag was a bit silly, and even Mr. Calloway himself would tell you that.
I was very proud of it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet you. You're proud of asking this question.
As a proud American.
Yeah, as a proud American, right? Me and the old man went round and round over that one.
But by '99, the hokey mysticism of The Undertaker and his Ministry of Darkness was clashing with the more reality-based vibe of the Attitude Era. After taking months off of television to recover from injuries and deal with the divorce of his first wife, the dead man returned from his sabbatical as the American Badass, basically an amped-up version of his real-life self. This new coat of paint blended in much more smoothly with the rest of the furniture around it, and it made The Undertaker feel much more natural and, dare I say, relatable. The American aspect of his character was at its strongest in the wake of the attacks on 9/11. For a crowd that was desperately seeking catharsis through wrestling, a guy who barely sold anything and won most of his matches in the name of the US was just what the doctor ordered. This extra American badass added some much-needed depth to one of WWE's most enduring characters. Then at the 2003 Survivor Series, Taker was buried alive for the umpteenth time and was brought back at WrestleMania 20, a hybrid of the badass and the deadass. Number 5. John Cena. I know we just had You Can't See May, and normally I would wait a little bit longer before talking about him again, but when it comes to WWE's biggest proponents of the American ideal in the modern age, who's a bigger example than Cena? John Cena's love and appreciation for the country and its armed forces has been very clear and apparent for nearly all the time he's been a top star. You've seen it for years in the dog tags he would wear to the ring or the salute he does when he makes his entrance. When the plot required it, like whenever Cena was feuding with a particularly nasty foreign heel, his mantra of hustle, loyalty, and respect would often blend in with the bootstrap mentality many Americans believe in, to pull yourself up from adversity and keep on fighting. Much like another person you'll see later on this countdown, in WWE's world, believing in John Cena meant you believed in America itself. It's hard to find other huge stars of his era whose careers were so deeply intertwined with America. He's the one who turned the US Championship into a spinner belt in 2004, then elevated it to one of the company's biggest titles in 2015. He played a Marine in his first starring film role. He announced to a live crowd that Osama bin Laden had been compromised to a permanent end. Oh, and have I mentioned he has a copy of the US Constitution in his freaking house? That's why nowadays, whenever I think of this, I also inevitably think of this.
And his name is John Cena!
Number 4. Dusty and Cody Rhodes. Now, when I first put this list together, this entry was originally set for just Cody by himself. But the more I thought about it, I realized you can't have the nightmare without the dream. Dusty Rhodes had proudly repped the spirit of America from the start, but with a more rowdy and rugged side as part of the Texas Outlaws with Dick Murdoch. The American dream was finally born in 1974 when a solo Dusty turned good against evil foreign heel Pak Song and his manager Gary Hart, soon becoming the biggest babyface in the territory and all of wrestling itself. From the mid-1970s until the rise of Hulk Hogan nearly 10 years later, no one captured the hearts and souls of American wrestling fans like Rhodes. By all industry standards, his appearance was less than perfect, but it was a huge part of what made him so relatable to the common man, if you will. I mean, is there a more relevant and identifiable promo in wrestling history than Hard Times?
They give him a watch, kick him in the butt, and say, hey, a computer took your place, daddy.
Constantly fighting from underneath against everyone from the Russians to the Horsemen, always showing true grit when it mattered most, Dusty Rhodes is truly an American wrestling hero for the ages. It took Cody Rhodes a while to embrace his American heritage, so to speak, as he famously dashed and mustached and danced around the cosmos in his first 10 years in WWE. But once the young man was left to his own devices following his 2016 exit, he gradually grew and evolved into his final form of the American Nightmare. Similar to his father, Cody's rise to stardom outside of the WWE bubble inspired tons of wrestlers and fans alike, practically turning him into a folk hero. Then All Elite Wrestling became a reality and his stock rose even higher. Despite the occasional missteps like booking himself out of ever becoming AEW champion, his off-putting US versus UK feud with Anthony Ogogo, and making a big deal out of his refusal to turn heel in spite of waning fan support, Cody helped build AEW from the ground up and is partly responsible for bringing about lots of positive change in the wrestling sphere. But a return to WWE was the ultimate destiny for the American Nightmare. In the 3 years since he's been back, Cody's become one of their most popular stars, a literal poster boy, the kind of star that Cody once believed that the company failed to see in him. Now with a glut of top-tier matches and moments already under his belt, along with access to the Dusty legacy he didn't have in AEW, the red, white, and blue feels like a familial coat of arms. And in my opinion, the timing of Cody's return to WWE and the company's recent resurgence both in the creative and business realms are not a coincidence. Number 3. Hacksaw Jim Duggan. I know that only being ranked third feels like a snub for Duggan, but hey, it's getting to be a very tight race at the top from here on out. One of the most enduring, patriotic wrestlers of all time, nobody embodied the rough and ready, rugged side of Americana better than Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Making his name in Bill Watts' Mid-South territory, Duggan was a burly everyman ready to fight anyone, domestic or foreign, who dared to challenge the American way of life. The flag-waving aspect of Duggan's character was turned up to 11 when he stormed the beaches of the World Wrestling Federation at WrestleMania 3, attacking those foreign no-goodniks Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik. He totally screwed the Killer Bees out of a potential win, but collateral damage. USA! USA! Duggan's WWF career nearly ended before it began after he was temporarily fired after being arrested for being caught smoking weed with his hated rival, the Iron Sheik. Come on, guys, work it into the storyline. Just say Duggan was trying to repair US and Iran relations through the magic of jazz cabbage. Upon his return, Hacksaw spent the next 7 years in the lower to mid card, but maintained a sky-high approval rating from the fans either way. He relished in his role as America's top ambassador, all while waging war with guys like the Sheik, Dino Bravo, and the Orient Express. His later run in WCW was similar to that of his WWF one in many respects. Never a true main eventer, but always guaranteed to get a huge reaction and overall impossible to hate. Not to say that WCW never put that Teflon coating to the test, with him pulling the TV title out of the trash and claiming it as his own, and even briefly betraying his country to join Team Canada. But despite that, Duggan remains an all-time fan favorite and a certifiable American badass in his own right, having beaten cancer twice. Number 2. Hulk Hogan. There is arguably no wrestler more synonymous with America in the 1980s than Hulk Hogan. It sort of makes sense. After all, it was the time period where America had kicked out of decades of war and social and economic turmoil, a capitalist hulking up, if you will. And lest we forget, Hogan is probably the most commodified wrestler of all time. It's no coincidence that his trademark red and yellow are also the top 2 colors proven by science to encourage people to spend and consume. The Hulkster was marketed as the American ideal, the peak of physical perfection who fought the good fight. Yes, Hogan was the big bronze bald eagle whose wings carried the WWF propaganda machine on the wind. And for his sake, thank the wrestling gods that his real American theme was available to use after the US Express quit the company in 1985. From winning the world title from the Iron Sheik in 1984 to fighting the likes of Nikolai Volkov, Killer Khan, Andre the Giant, heck, even Roddy Piper was a forward heel if you think about it, Hogan spent the majority of the 80s fending off threats to God and country. And we can't forget his patriotic feud with the Iraqi turncoat Sergeant Slaughter in 1991. All that equity Hogan had built up for nearly a decade was spent at King of the Ring 93, when he essentially made Yokozuna in his final televised piece of action in the company for about a decade. For as long as Hogan was decked out in the red and yellow, his love of the nation was never in doubt. Then in 2003, they really went whole hog, a bad choice of words, by firing Hogan in kayfabe and having him come back as the masked Mr. America. Equal parts cringeworthy and hilarious, it's unfortunate that the Mr. America storyline never reached a natural conclusion, as Hogan walked away from the company after a dispute over his WrestleMania 19 payoff. But time heals all wounds, and Hogan would wind up going into their Hall of Fame soon afterward, going down in wrestling history as a true symbol of America, warts and all. Before I give you my #1 patriotic pick, here are a couple of honorable American mentions. Lex Luger. I've spoken at length before about Luger and the WWF's attempt at making him their new All-American hero in the wake of Hulk Hogan's departure. I even did a whole video about it this time last year, so if you want the details, I highly recommend watching that. Though this run was a defining chapter of the Total Package's career, full of missed potential and what-ifs, it was only a blip in his overall story. He never really carried on his rah-rah America shtick once he went back to WCW, and even though that run had its ups and downs, at least they never put him on a bus. Jack Swagger. Okay, I'll be honest, his nickname is doing a lot of the heavy lifting here, which is why it's just an honorable mention, but come on, an all-American? American? Woo, that's a lot of Americans. The man known today by his real name of Jake Hager was strong out the gate after his time in WWE developmental. He became ECW champion within months, and by the time his run in the company had wrapped up, he had also won the US title, the Money in the Bank briefcase, and the World Heavyweight Championship, though that run was both short-lived and not given much respect. But damn it, I'll always show love for his team with Cesaro and the Swagger Soaring Eagle.
Let the eagle soar.
JBL. It's no surprise that John Bradshaw Layfield would end up on this list in some form or fashion. After all, the man has been given credit for getting the ball rolling on what's become WWE's annual Tribute to the Troops special. Then there's that iconic shift in character in 2003, going from a beer-drinking Texan cowboy to a suit-wearing New York tycoon. From the rural to the urban, from livestock to trading stock, from blue-collar to white-collar, Bradshaw performed on both ends of the American spectrum throughout his career to great success.
America, 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 America.
American males, American males, American males, American males.
And my #1 pick for the greatest American wrestler, parentheses gimmick, is Sergeant Slaughter. At the top of my list is a wrestler who in his prime was such a strong symbol of patriotism, he became a cultural touchstone for the American way outside of the wrestling business. While Slaughter's character is known today as that of an American hero, many forget that he actually started out in the WWF as a vicious heel. It wasn't until 1984, 4 years after first arriving in the company, when he turned face and fought the hated Iron Sheik, leading to one of the hottest feuds of the entire year. But the peace between Slaughter and the Federation ended soon after, when Sarge signed a deal with Hasbro to become the living, breathing human face of the G.I. Joe toy brand, about as American as a toy could be in the 80s. However, Vince McMahon demanded that the Federation receive a cut, which led to Slaughter walking away at the height of his popularity in response and jumping ship to the AWA. But by that point, Vern Gagne's organization had already begun its swift decline, and over time Slaughter became much more identified as a member of G.I. Joe than as an active wrestler. Slaughter came back to the WWF, campaign hat in hand, in 1990, only now there was a twist. Hoping to capitalize on the real-life conflict between the US and Iraq at the time, Slaughter was recast as an Iraqi sympathizer who loved Saddam Hussein's regime and hated America, Hulkamania. Though it led to Slaughter winning the championship from the Ultimate Warrior at the '91 Rumble, the gimmick wreaked havoc on Slaughter's personal life, as he and his family incurred death threats and had to have a security detail to protect them from crazed fans until the heat died down. Once the program with Hogan ended, Slaughter quickly turned back babyface after begging for his country back. After a few months of being suddenly shunted to the lower mid-card, Slaughter quietly retired to become an agent for the company, then eased into his role as wrestling's preeminent patriotic elder statesman, and probably one of the most successful military gimmicks in history. Which is why I believe Sergeant Slaughter is the greatest American... just 1 second, please. Hang on. Oh my. Folks, late-breaking news. It turns out Sergeant Slaughter has been disqualified from the running due to stolen valor. Yeah, turns out he spent years claiming he was in the Marines and served before he was a wrestler and he was a drill sergeant, and it turns out it's all bullshit. I can see people defending this facade and saying that Bob Remus, the person, is different from Sergeant Slaughter, the character. I get that he came from an era where you had to keep kayfabe and commit to the bit at all costs, but lying about being in the military isn't usually something that's taken lightly. Through countless interviews over the decades and through the mythology of wrestling, we all just kind of collectively believed that he had served before wrestling, and no one really questioned it, until some people started questioning it. The recent realization about the man's non-existent military record has really put a smear on what was an otherwise fine reputation as a performer, which is why I can't in good conscience put him at number 1 on this list. Anyway, here's the real number 1. Oh sure, you can wave a 2x4 around, or slap the American flag on the belly of your singlet, or star in a movie about an invincible Marine, but in my opinion, the most patriotic thing an athlete can possibly do is win an Olympic gold medal for their country. Oh, it's true. It's true. Kurt Angle fulfilled the hopes and dreams of an entire nation at the '96 Olympic Games, overcoming the death of his father, the murder of his coach Dave Schultz, and of course a broken freaking neck to take home the gold for the good old USA. Had Kurt Angle emerged from the Olympics in 2000 or 2004, there is no doubt in my mind he would have transitioned to MMA and done pretty well for himself there. Lucky for us wrestling fans, though, it was ECW who got their claws into him first.
I was really upset, and I went to Paul Heyman and I said, hey, I can't be on the same show as this. You can't air this show with me on it. If you do, you're going to hear from my attorney.
Oh wow, talk about a real butterfly effect that would have had that been enough to scare him away from the business. Long story short, Angle landed in the WWF instead, and the rest is history. After one of the best rookie years ever, the rest of Kurt's career was bedazzled with accomplishments and title victories, fueled by an unbreakable will to be the best and to push to the absolute limits in spite of all the odds. This unfortunately set Kurt off on a spiral of injuries and drug abuse that ultimately caused him to be released from the company in 2006. But despite his personal issues, he became one of the tentpole performers for the burgeoning TNA wrestling, giving the company instant star power and legitimacy. Kurt became a star in WWE, but his actual in-ring work truly peaked in TNA. Kurt always came out decked in his nation's colors, wearing his Olympic medals and kicking all kinds of ass. So no matter what company Kurt wrestled for, or whether he was a face or a heel, deep down you always knew what he was fighting for. When I think of the most American wrestlers, I think of the wrestling machine Kurt Angle, and that's why he's at the top of my list. But who else do you think belongs in this countdown? Let me know in the comments section below. Well, if there's one thing that I've learned in all my years of life and all my years of observing wrestling, it's that patriotism is not just reserved for Americans. In 2 weeks' time, we're going to do another countdown showing you the best examples of all the foreign baddies. Who represented their non-American country the best and the brightest? You're going to find out then. But until then, folks, be sure to give the video a thumbs up if you like it, subscribe to Wrestling with Wregret, hit that bell icon for all the notifications. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.